The islands were invaded on the 2nd of April. And by the 9th of April, three para, which was the Spearhead Battalion, remember there's the three parachute regiment battalions, they were the Spearhead. And by the 9th of April, three para were on their way. But the infamous Colonel H decided that he wanted his boys to go too. So pretty much from the very beginning, we knew, Gary knew, that that was something that H was trying to achieve, so that two para were going to go as well as three para.
How long did he have to, how long was there, say between April 9th, do you remember the date he actually shipped out?
Oh yeah, it was my mother's birthday, 26th of April.
So what is he doing between the 9th and the 26th, or between that first week of April and the day he actually ships out? I guess I want to ask, what is he doing to get ready, and what are you doing to get ready?
There was immediately all leave is cancelled. Immediately, the the, the the training, the fitness, everything has to continue. That they're always, the ethos of the parachute regiment is ready for anything. So there was carrying on with the training, getting prepared in terms of the usual training and just keeping that up, especially the fitness side of things. But it was realistically just waiting for it to be confirmed that they were definitely going. And secondly, it was a case of we're going as soon as the ship is ready. So they went down on the MV Norland, which was like a roll on roll off ferry, which was prepared, and a few things swapped around a bit so that they could become a troops carrier.
As the news of the Falklands is coming in and as it's becoming increasingly clear that he's going to go, did what impact did that have on his personality, on how he sort of operated day to day?
We just made the best of every moment we had together. Um, he obviously had to go into camp every day. He couldn't go and visit family or go anywhere. But he came home every night because they were preparing. And so we just made the best of every bit of time we had together. We did what we typically did. We went out to the pub and played games of pool and had fun. And that was a very special time. It was, for all of us, frustrating in that, three times they went into camp thinking this was it, they were going to be ready to go, and then came home that night, the ship wasn't ready. So you're like, oh yeah, I've got another night, and then got to do this all over again. And then finally on the third day, it was no, we're definitely going today.
As all of this is working out, what are you doing? How are you preparing to the extent you could?
Just trying to get on with daily life and not let him know how scared I actually was.
Were you following the news? Were you paying close attention to what was going on in the Falklands?
Not until after he left. Um, the day that he went, we said goodbye at home. He was adamant. He said, I don't want you coming down to the dockside. He said, I can't have my last vision of you on the dockside crying, and I know you've got to go home on your own. And so we said goodbye at home.
Yeah. And he said something to you that that I think he used an expression that he didn't normally use. What did he say to you?
Said goodbye, girlie.
And why did that strike you as it did at the moment?
So Girlie was my nickname. He always called me Girlie. And from the time I went to live with him in Berlin, the first time he went away on exercise, he said goodbye. I said, no, 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 no. You don't ever say goodbye. Goodbyes are forever. You say ta-da, see you later, bye, anything but goodbye. So we used to have this kind of thing that we did where he'd say, see you later. And I'd be like, alligator, or it would be the other way around. And we always made goodbyes very light-hearted until that last time.
When he said goodbye, girly, then, given everything you've said, how did that strike you?
This always gets me. He was ready to go with all of his gear. And he'd walked about 3 feet outside the back door, maybe slightly more. And he just paused and turned around and looked straight at me and said, was that it? And in that moment, we both knew what that meant.
What did it mean?
Bye. I'm not coming back.
And did you feel certain about that? Was that something that you just knew?
Yeah.
And you write about having, I don't remember exactly, is it a dream or a premonition or the combination of both?
It
Um,
was a it was a premonition by way of a dream. And I used to get this recurring dream, and there would just be this knock at the door. And when you dream, like you have this idea, maybe in black and white, maybe in color, but you have this idea of the scene. We're speaking now, and I can see the background where you are, and you can see the background where I am, and you kind of have a scene that you have a whole picture of. But in this dream, there was just like this dark corridor, and a door at the end of it, and there would be a knock at the door, and sometimes it was always an officer, but sometimes they were in uniform and sometimes they were in civilian clothes, always coming to tell me the same thing. And I'd had that dream for about 2 years before he died. And out of all of the things, I did have a marriage where there's nothing that there's things I could tell his friends about him these days that they probably didn't know. There's nothing we couldn't tell each other. We had such a deep connection. Nothing was taboo to talk about, but I couldn't tell him that.
and in the dream, the premonition, were you aware of what the message was, or was that always a question mark?
I knew, I knew what that knock on the door meant.
Of course, it takes the Norland, some time to get there. Two-para goes in. There's the important, um, perhaps decisive battle at Goose Green. Um, is that where Gary lost his life at Goose Green? What happened? What led to his being killed on the Falkland Islands?
So if you imagine the way that the battalion are trying to take ground, you've got the chaos of war around you, but you've kind of got a staggering of sort of A, B, C, D. They're all in different across this terrain. The official version is that Gary was killed storming an Argentine machine gun nest. He was section leader of his platoon. In reality, when you look at the terrain, which I've actually had the terrain, so I know it, in the dark, you're not storming anything. The RGs are dug in, and so all you know if you're in a situation like that is you're kind of pinned down by fire, and you can see the direction the fire's coming from, and somehow you've got to do something about it. And so they were edging forward, his platoon were edging forward. And the next thing you know, as Gary's edging forward as section leader, he's pretty much come right in front of this machine gun nest. And my understanding from people who were actually there at the time is that how he died was that he had obviously been shooting and trying to destroy the enemy, but that one of the men that he killed just managed to squeeze off a last round from a machine gun before he fell. It gave Gary a catastrophic head injury, and his gunner, Baz Grayling, was slightly injured, but he was hit in his water bottle in his hip. Um, so, that's what kind of saved him. And it's just that pure fate. Some people get shot, some people, the bullet whizzes straight past their ear, and it is what it is. It's the hardest thing in the world, because no matter how much you don't want it to be your husband or your son or your father, you don't want it to be anybody else's either. But when you're section leader and you're going into a situation like that, you're right up. And that was Gary's personality. Put me right up the front. That's where I belong.
His time leaving the UK to the day, what was the day he lost his life?
28th of May.
To the 28th of May, so about a month. In that time, did he have a chance to write letters and send them to you?
Yeah.
I wonder if there are any passages from those letters that especially, as you look back, stand out in your mind as especially significant in retrospect. I'm sure all of the letters are important and every word is important, but I wonder if
Yeah.
there's something that is especially poignant.
I think for me, knowing what he was going to, one thing that I was again be very grateful for is Gary was a great Jacques Cousteau fan. He absolutely loved anything to do with Jacques Cousteau and the marine life and all of those kind of things. And so the things that bring me joy even to this day is that he sent me these excited letters home about the flying fish and the dolphins that he'd seen. And the journey along the way, there were some really beautiful sights that he got to see that were things he'd only ever normally seen on the television. And those was very special things for him.
How much of a time was there between the last letter he sent to you and when he was lost at Goose Green?
I got two letters after he was killed.
That were in transit at the time.
Yeah, so when he died, a friend of mine came to stay with me so that she could look after basically my daughter and the everyday tasks and stuff, because I was just bowled over by how much paperwork there was and how much stuff there was to do. And it just seemed this never ending flow of people, in and out of my apartment. And I'd been out one day and doing something and came back, and we had a bookcase. And I don't know if you're aware, the Brits call them blueies. They're like these little airmail envelopes that you kind of write inside and then stick together. Um, and I came home and just saw these two blueies on the bookcase and just looked at my friend, and she said, I really didn't know whether to hide them from you, but I couldn't. That was hard. That was hard.
Are you say that, as Gary's preparing to go, you're not really following closely what's happening in the Falklands. When he was on his way, when the Norland was on its way, and I'm sure obviously you're not able to follow exactly where he is and to know where he is, but as all that is going on, over that month's period, are you at that point paying attention to the news? Are you following what's happening in the Falklands closely and trying to piece it together? Where might Gary be involved in this story?
Not so much where he might be involved, but you start being aware that the Sheffield was hit on the 4th of May, so he wasn't even there yet. You start being very, very aware that things are starting to happen. That this diplomatic resolution is not going to happen.
Yeah.
We are actually, the idea of them getting there, the idea of them kind of like during their time on the ships while the task force is on its way, majority of people had this idea that there may be a diplomatic solution along the way. When the Sheffield got bombed on the 4th of May, that gets blown out of the water. Literally. And you then realize that this shit just got real, and there's no diplomatic resolution coming. We don't know how long it's going to go on for. We don't know how many people are going to die. We don't know what's going to happen. We just know it's happening now. It's real. I think the hardest thing, I mean, I gave up my job in that few weeks because it was just too stressful in the end. Um, but nobody at work could understand why I was so terrified. They were like, oh, he's not even there yet. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, your husband hasn't gone. If your husband was on his way, I don't think you would be quite so chirpy. And so it was really hard not working with people that just didn't seem to get it, how scary it was.
And there is, at least so far as I understand it, sort of an outburst of patriotism and here in the US, I remember, a famous magazine cover, The Empire Strikes Back, and this kind of thing. Did that have any impact on you at all? Did that matter to you at all? Did that really even register? That in the country at large, there's kind of this, strong sense of patriotism, this strong sense of support of the troops. Did that really matter to you?
No, because I was literally eaten up every day with fear. I had that dream. He'd said goodbye. And the only thing that was going to change that is if it was all over and he miraculously came home. I was just eaten up with fear every day.
So the news comes to you. I mean, you mentioned a little while ago, you mentioned Colonel H,
Yeah.
and he's also killed there in the Falklands. And I guess news of his death arrives where you lived before news about Gary. Um, what happened in terms of Colonel H and the news about what happened to him?
Okay, so Gary actually died on the Friday, but no news had come through. So the 28th was the Friday. So the Saturday was the 29th. And the irony of how I heard about H's death was that I was outside. It was a beautifully hot, sunny day. And I was outside. I had like a little square outside the flats when one of the sergeant's wives came running out of her quarters, screaming hysterically, "They're dead, they're dead, they're all dead." So I got up and went over. "What are you talking about? What do you mean? Well, the CO's been killed." She just heard from one of the officers' wives that the CO was killed. The news had come through, Sunray is down. So her logic was, if the CO is dead, they're all dead. The whole battalion's down. And the irony of that moment was I was calming her down and saying, "You don't know that. You don't know that the whole battalion is down. We have to wait for news." And I managed to calm her down, and I went back and I sat with the person that I was with, and I sat down and she said to me, "It'll be okay." And I said, "You don't understand, it isn't." And I just burst into tears. He'd already been dead 24 hours then. And I knew, I just knew. And then they came at 8 o'clock on the Sunday morning, and the doorbell rang. And I remember lying in bed thinking, if I just lay here quietly, they'll go away. And as quickly as I thought that, I thought, don't be ridiculous. They're only going to come back. And they're going to know you're in. It's 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Where else are you going to be? So you have this kind of battle in your head between what logic is telling you and what you don't want to have to hear. Besides which, nobody used our front door. Everyone used the back door. So, who else is it going to be 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning? And so I got up and I opened the door. And it was in that moment that I realized the significance of the dream, because we lived in an apartment of where there was no natural light in the hallway unless there was a bedroom door open or something. This was a dark hallway. And then I realized this was exactly what I'd been dreaming, and this was the door, and this was the moment. And I knew that as soon as I opened that door, I was not going to hear that he was injured. I was not going to hear that he might survive. It was going to be the worst possible news, and it was.
Did they just tell you this at the door? Did they come inside? How did that work out?
They tried their very best to get me the length of the hallway into the lounge before they broke the news, but I was kind of saying, "Just tell me."
Mhm.
So we managed to actually get into the lounge itself when they broke the news. And I just remember screaming, and it was just one of the worst moments of my entire life. You marry somebody that's serving and you know that it's a possibility, but nothing prepares you for when it becomes a reality. Nothing prepares you for that.
And my understanding is that the British tradition, um, at least to a substantial degree, has been that British soldiers are buried where they fall. Um, and
Yeah.
that and then so now of course the Falklands is under the British flag, but British soldiers are buried where they fall, and that kind of becomes a piece of Britain. So was the assumption at the outset that Gary would be buried in the Falklands and that's where he would remain?
Well, initially at Goose Green, they were all buried in a mass grave because you're still at war and you've just got to do what you've got to do and carry on. the thing we had talked about, actually, after I had a close call, not long after we got married, was what we both wanted. If anything were to happen, because 21 years of age, Gary didn't expect that he might be thinking about burying his wife, but you have a close call and then suddenly you're faced with it. And my wish was to be buried, and his was to be cremated. Um, and it was one of his peculiarities. He always said to me, "Girlie, don't ever bury me, even if it's a bomb. Just cremate what's left." And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "Oh, don't. I've just got this thing about being buried in the ground. And the worms get it." I'm like, "Gary, come on. You're a paratrooper. Like, what is this?" It's just how I feel. And okay. Um, and I remember saying to him, you do realize the worms don't actually get you. You're gonna be completely. I know, but it's just I've got this. He had the complete phobia about being buried in the ground. He
Mm.
didn't care how he died. He knew every time he went out on an exercise in Ireland, certainly when he went to the Falklands, he knew that he was putting his life potentially on the line. Didn't care about that side of it. It was something, if it happened, it happened. That's what I've signed up for. But he cared about what happened after. And that was worse than the knock on the door, because I made him a promise that I couldn't carry out. That was heartbreaking.
So how did that story play out? Gary's first is in a mass grave at Goose Green, and then where do things go from there?
Apparently, everybody was asking the same questions because, you know, Northern Ireland is part of Britain. So if you die in Northern Ireland, there's not far to repatriate you. It's not the same thing. And it had been a long time since we'd been in any kind of war or conflict. So unbeknownst to me, I was led to believe by somebody in the family's office that I was the only one making a fuss. But in actual fact, I stopped reading the newspaper, so I had no idea there was all these other articles in papers that people were absolutely, you know, all singing from the same sheet. That people wanted, so it was a case then that we had to take it to government, we had to fight for it. Um, and then there was a decision made which hit the newspapers on our wedding anniversary. And that was pretty bittersweet. But it meant that I could give him the cremation that he wanted. And I remember, because at the point that I'm a widow and I'm no longer the wife of, I don't have to be polite anymore. I remember screaming down the phone at this guy saying, "You don't get to tell me that my husband has given his life for his country and he can't be cremated. So you either build a crematorium in the Falklands and you cremate him there, or you bring him home. I don't care which. I made a promise and I need to carry out that promise." It didn't go down very well, you can imagine.
But did he, I mean, and so was Gary brought home and cremated? He was. When did you go to the Falklands yourself?
2017.
How was that?
Nothing like I expected it to be. It was somewhere that I had no, I just had no interest in going there. To me, it was, it was somewhere. 8,000 miles away, that my husband lost his life and had no interest in going there. And then there's something weird that happens and was happening with many people that year. And I think that's when, you know, your own mortality either hits you because you have you have a loss of somebody when you're very young, or usually it will happen by the time you're about 40, because you come to an understanding that you probably lived as, you know, as long or maybe longer than you've got left. So all of us human beings, we get a sense of our mortality at some point. But it then gets in more in your face when you get that bit older, and people, you know, I mean, I was 60 in 2017. So, you know, it comes to the point where people are actually starting to pass in your generation from whatever. And so there was a lot of us that felt very different. There was something about the 35th anniversary that really shifted a lot of things for a lot of people. It wasn't just me. And then suddenly I decided, you know what, I need to go. I actually need to go. And so I arranged the trip. And then me being me, I thought, actually, I want to tab his last footsteps. I want to understand what it was like.
Yeah.
I want to understand that terrain. And so I decided I was going to do it for charity. And the last photos I have of him were when they were on the Sussex Mountain before they got over to Goose Green. So I had this bright idea, you know, and I don't had some health issues. There I am, you have this bright idea, you know, I'm going to tab across country you know, and do his last footsteps. And all the guys kept saying to me, "Oh, good luck, Jay. You know, it's very unforgiving terrain." And I kept saying to them, "Can you just please stop saying that until I've been?" Because I don't really want to hear that bit. Anyway, I've got a very good friend, um, my friend Lonnie and his wife, and they really helped me train for it. So they live near Aldershot, and so they took me on all the old P Company training ground, and you know I was doing 10 milers up the old Hungry Hill and all the P Company training ground from back in the day. So I knew I could do 10 miles, but I didn't know if I could do the rest. Um, and my emotions when I got to Brize Norton, I kind of just wanted to just go back home. You know, I didn't feel emotionally I could actually cope with the trip. But I had agreed with one of the veterans that I would, that, you know, be supportive of the sister of somebody else who died over there. The day that I got there, the plan was that I would stay that night at the lodge, and then the following day we would go down to Sussex Mountain and stay on the farm overnight. And I got up in the morning, put the kettle on, went to turn around to say to one of the veterans, "Good morning," and like nothing came out of my mouth. I'd lost my voice. And I'd had to go and get this quick doctor's appointment. I got a chest infection, and I went, great, you know, this is good timing. Um, it wasn't a bad chest infection, but it was inconvenient, you know, it wasn't great. Anyway, we drove down to Sussex Mountain that night and stayed at this farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, and just I remember sitting enjoying the company before we all went to retire for the night, and thinking, I really don't know how I'm going to do tomorrow, both physically and mentally. I don't know how I'm going to be, but I'm just going to have to one foot in front of the other. And it was an incredible experience, because not only did I get to do his literally his last footsteps, but I got to walk all the way into Goose Green and put a poppy on the memorial there and finish and complete the bit that he couldn't do. And there was this weird time. I had somebody over there that had sort of planned the route the D Company took. And I'm just sort of playing following my leader, I'm just literally putting one foot in front of the other. But all of a sudden, I just stopped dead in my tracks. And all the hairs went up, like the hackles went up. And the guy I was with said to me, "You all right?" And I said, "Yeah. I've just got this really weird feeling." He said, "Me too." I said, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" And he said, "Probably." And when I came back to the UK, I was very good friends with David Burness before he died. And he had been the communications officer in the Falklands, Para. And I contacted him, and he gave me the coordinates of where Gary actually was killed, and it was pretty much where we were standing. It was the most surreal experience, and that whole trip, in so many ways, was very healing. I met a woman over there who blew me away. We were in a pub one night, and she just came up and hugged and hugged and hugged and hugged me. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is the first time I'd really met somebody that had been affected by Goose Green itself. I was over in the islands, but she said to me, "I was held prisoner in the village hall in Goose Green for a month with 3 children under the age of 10. And every day we prayed that the British soldiers would come and rescue us." And then you have a situation where you have a woman hearing the story of another woman and her situation as a direct consequence of the Argentinian invasion and what it was like for her. And that put a whole different meaning on Gary's death to me, because, of course, it would have been great if there hadn't been a war, or if there had been a war, nobody got killed. That's not realistic. But it turns into something so much more personal, and you're meeting people he went to save. This is, okay, so you can see the cat badge, the all-important cat badge, and their whole train. So this is Gary's original beret.
Hold it up a little bit more. So hold up a little higher. There it is. Yeah.
So that's his original beret, and it's something I will never part with. It's hard to explain. I don't know if you know the expression that anyone in the parachute regiment, they like to use the word alley.
Mm-hmm.
So they look alley. That's their thing. And so he would literally, including the actual day that he left, he would spend ages in front of the mirror getting this position just right to look alley. So, for me, it's not just about the fact that he went through P Company to earn this beret and what the maroon beret is about. For me, it's about the man that I was married to for nearly 5 years and how he felt looking alley wearing it, and how important this part of his uniform was to him. I used to tease him quite a lot about it. Are you ready yet, dear? Because so he spent so much time, and he used to. You can see it actually in that iconic photo, which is the one you've got of him in Northern Ireland. You can see it where he's kind of almost covering one eye, that how he got away with the way he wore it sometimes, I mean, no, you're pushing it a bit, but it was just had to be right.